And so, as we sit for a moment this morning, we're simply taking an inventory of the energies that are with us, the way they're manifesting. And just assessing if the energies of thought, action, belief, story are heavy and burdensome or light and radiant. And in making that gentle assessment, we're also recognizing on some level what parts of our belief system, what parts of the story, what parts of our tendency need to change in order to facilitate a greater healing, a greater sense of wholeness, a greater sense of being. And so breathing in and out and simply being aware of what you're carrying with you in this moment. Be aware. And place the right hand on the heart and the left hand over the right. And as you feel yourself breathing, and as you come into a deeper understanding of what you're carrying, also open the ears, the inner senses, to experiencing the inner prayer, the sacred nada, the sound of the divine that resonates within you. Allow all obstacles and barriers to the experience of that divinity to fall away, to disappear. Allow yourself to take sanctuary in the beauty of the space within. And together we'll lift our voices in one beautiful Om. Take a nice breath in. And bowing the head toward the heart, acknowledging all that is, and drawing the face back to center, and release the hands. Good morning. So this morning we're going to talk a bit about purity. And in class this morning, I actually had read a passage from Swami Chidvilasananda, who is also lovingly known as Guru Mahima. And she said the following. She said, Sattva Samshuddhi. The literal meaning of this word is very profound. Sat stands for truth, which is the essence of your being, inside and out. And Shuddhi means purity. So the absolute purity of the essence of your being is Sattva Samshuddhi. The absolute purity of the essence of your being. Now sometimes people see pictures of us at the ashram, particularly the staff and the students who are in trainings, and they see that we wear white. And all of a sudden a fear comes to their mind. They must be serious. They must be, fundamental on some level. They must be stern. They must be something, Some people even associate the color white with cult. Yeah, absolutely. And what they don't realize is that the simplicity of wearing white allows space for something else. Like, let's just say that your life was a 1-gallon bucket. That's it. You have a 1-gallon bucket. And there's a space inside of that 1-gallon bucket that relates to 1 gallon. What are you going to put there? What are you going to fill that space up with? Are you going to fill the space up with stories of would've, could've, should've? Will you fill the space up with shoes, fashion, food, sex, drugs? What will you fill the space up with? Because once the space is filled, you don't have room for anything else. So sometimes in yoga, we decide to simplify so that there's more space available. We say, well, if I don't sit there and expend hours upon hours upon hours and dollars upon dollars upon dollars in filling my closet with all different types of clothes. And now, mind you, I've gone through that phase in my life. I was absolutely a fashion person for a while. But when I think back about the hours upon hours that I spent shopping, selecting, dressing, makeuping, hairing, the whole thing. And I think to myself, oh my gosh, up until about the age of, I guess, 40, probably a quarter of the time available was spent getting dressed up. And then I think about it, there were times I really enjoyed it, girls' night out, getting dressed up, putting on the makeup, having the conversation. But I look back at that now, and I just ask myself, what did I bring forward from that? What did I bring forward in my life from that? I don't have any more of those clothes, And that's not just because I wear mostly white now. It's because at that point in time, I got bored with them, so I donated them and got something else. There was no consistency, no longevity. There was a kind of an intention there, but it wasn't a deep intention. It wasn't the thing that brought healing to my life in any way, shape, or form. We can look at food like that too. We can say, well, how many different kinds of cookies do we really need? How many different kind of cakes? I go into Whole Foods and they have the most amazing bakery there. Have you ever gone in Whole Foods and looked at their bakery? Oh, the colors and the shapes and the decorations are amazing. You could just sit there for hours and stare and potentially buy and eat. What is that going to bring to you? When it fills up the space that you have available in this moment, in this day, in this week, in this life, what is it going to bring to you? It's not wrong to buy the cake, and it's not right to buy the cake. It's just a choice. The consequence of the choice is how does it sit with you? So I would buy clothes, and then I would feel bad about it. I would get dressed up, and I would never be quite satisfied. I would buy the cake, and then I would feel really horrible after. So then I bought a smaller cake, and then you still feel horrible after because all that sugar. When we talk about sattva samshuddhi in yoga, what we're saying is, we're saying a few things. We're saying, first of all, the absolute essence of your being is already pure. It's already pure. It's like the porcelain under the soap scum in your shower. It's like you have to kind of wash away the soap scum to see how really beautiful the porcelain is. It's like you buy an old house and it's got stained carpet. And so you pull the carpet up. And then you find there's another carpet under there, and you pull that carpet up. And then you find the most pristine wood floor. So all these things that we adopt, all these behaviors that we adopt as part of our life, as part of our daily regimen, as part of our escape mechanisms, as part of our expression of freedom, they all have a consequence to them. And typically the consequence of most actions will be that they leave a film over the essence of your true self. They make it a little bit harder to see yourself for who you really are. So there came a point in time where I decided that I was just going to get rid of most of the clothes that I own and not buy more. That I would have the white for teaching and for most days in life too. And I would have a few other things that I've had for a long time. But I would simplify. And by simplifying, there's now more space in my bucket. And then I look at the food that I've eaten over the years. And I say, well, I've had that chocolate cake quite a few times, and every time it's been the same exact experience. You know, the bellyache and the sugar high and then the crash. And so I'll simplify my food. I'll eat whole food, fresh food, food that's good for me. And by making that choice to become more simple, I now have more space in my bucket. And so we're looking at life like a bucket. It's a 1-gallon bucket. That's all the space you've got. What are you going to fill it with? Friends, fame, fortune, distractions, whatever it is that you choose, you put it in that bucket, but how is it affecting your perception of your true self? How is it affecting your ability to see yourself for who you really are? And so at some point, typically, what'll happen is that we'll start taking stuff out of the bucket because we realize that we need more space in which to commit to our spiritual practice, which is the only thing that really shows us who we really are. Everything else is a disguise. Or if it's not a disguise, it's a smudge on the mirror. You know, it's a distraction from seeing what is actually there. So Guru Mahima, she talks about this in this chapter of her book, and she says, Sattva Samshuddhi is the essence of the purity of self within. And that word purity can sometimes cause people to cringe because then they start getting fearful. They're like, well, what do I have to give up to be pure? And then they see that some people adopt wearing white and eating whole foods. And they get scared of that. And they say, well, that's too weird. That's not familiar enough. Other people become vegans. And they're like, well, that's bad. That's like totally too radical. Other people become peace protesters. And they're like, well, they're violent. They're peace protesters. Yeah. Whatever it is that we see other people doing in order to purify their own heart, we take offense to because we're afraid of what we have to let go of in our own life in order to conduct that deeper inquiry. And in a nutshell, that's pretty much what's up in the world today. There's so much fear. There's so much, you're different than me. There's so much, this belongs to me. This is mine, 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 mine. There's no space for anybody else. The gallon bucket is not only full, it's like overflowing with fear. It's overflowing with grasping. It's overflowing with negative. It's overflowing with insinuation. It's overflowing with violence. It's so distorted. It's so distorted. It really just needs to get dumped out. Dumped out. Clean start. All over. Revisit the virtues. The virtues of non-harming. The virtue of truthfulness. The virtue of non-grasping. The virtue of devotion. The virtue of generosity. The virtue of discipline. Whoa, you had me up until discipline. It's true, isn't it, though? It's like in the world we live in today, spirituality is a fluff. It's fluffy. It's truly fluffy. You know, people will walk up to you and be like, oh, I'm absolutely spiritual. Well, what's your practice? What do you mean? I'm a nice person. I have no doubt about that. Talk to me about yourself. How do you relate to God? What are you talking about? I don't need to do any of that. There's no discipline. Well, if you don't relate to God, then how do you know you're a good person? How do you know you're a nice person? Well, because I said I am. And then the voice changes. And the tenor of the voice becomes insulted. Well, if you were committing yourself to a spiritual practice where you were having a conversation with the divinity, no matter what name you call it by, or no matter whether you think it's a male or a female or whatever, if you had that relationship, that spiritual practice, what in yoga we call sadhana, then the nature of you becomes more humble. And if a person asks you a question, you don't take offense to it. You just answer the question as best you can and move on. But we, in the West, we take offense to everything. And one of the primary reasons for that is because there's no sadhana in place. There's no spiritual practice in place for so many people. And it's not meant to be a judgment, but it is meant to be an awareness. We need to know why there's so much pain and suffering right now in the West. It's because we're listening to the wrong voices. We're listening to the wrong voices, and we're making assumption after assumption after assumption about everybody else's intentions but our own. We're not paying enough attention to those. If we want to be pure-hearted, then we need to purify our heart. And the thing we need to purify the heart from is hate and innuendo and greed and jealousy and anything that goes in those categories. So if we want to experience the pureness of our own heart, then we need to rein it in and stop judging everything on the outside of us as an excuse to avoid our own state of impurity. If we want to experience a pure mind, then we need to really look at our thoughts. And whenever we have a thought about, check that person out, aren't they just less than I am? Or, look at that person, aren't they so much more amazing than me? We need to rein those thoughts in and stop judging ourselves in comparison to the things that are outside of ourselves. Because there's no better or worse. There's only different. And different is not better or worse. It's just different. And if we want to experience the purity of relationship, then we need to change the structure of our relationships so that they're not so based in requirement. I never forget when I was about, I guess maybe 18 or 19, I had a brief relationship with a guy. He's a cute guy. And my best friend, who was Italian, said to me, he was Puerto Rican. She said, I won't be able to be your friend anymore if you date him. I said, what? She said, yeah, no. She said, anybody else you want, but not him. I said, why? What's up with him? And it was because he was Puerto Rican. I said, well, then I guess our friendship is going out the window, because if that's the requirement you're going to put on me to be your friend, you need to reassess yourself. At like the tender age of 18, I knew that already, And of course she thought about it and apologized, but still, how many ways do we put requirements on people for the relationship that we want to have with them? We say, you have to be what I want you to be. You have to be the way I think you should be. I was talking with somebody recently. I don't remember who it was. And we were having this conversation about falling in love. And the person was saying something to the effect of that the person that they were with, that there were some things they wanted to change about them. They hadn't been together very long. I think they've only been together for a couple of months, maybe. And, it's puppy love. It's like that new honeymoon phase. And I said, but if you change those things about that person, then they're not going to be the person that you fell in love with.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they were like, huh. I said, yeah. I said, if you ask them to change, then they're not the person you fell in love with. Maybe they will change on their own over time, and most people do because we all grow, and we all do grow out of ourselves and into somebody else. Absolutely happens all the time.
But if the person still feels a need to change that person, are they truly in love with them?
Well, there you have it. That's the question, right? And then what we're looking at is saying, well, where is the purity of love in that relationship? Is that relationship is then based in a human love, which has great limitation to it. Divine love has no limitation. Divine love is unconditional. And we say, I want to be unconditionally loved. But we don't know how to give that. So how on earth would we know how to receive that? And if we don't know how to receive it, how on earth will we ever know how to give it? So we put small little preferences in place at first. We're like, well, you opened the door for me. I love you. You said I look nice today. I love you. You kissed me on the forehead. I love you. You didn't say good morning to me. I still love you, but you're treading shallow water here. You forgot my birthday.
Oh.
So we kind of, that's a real interesting area to be in. So what would unconditional love be? Unconditional love would just be being able to take in the awe of another human spirit and just be like, you're amazing, in and out. Not amazing with the ego. Your spirit is amazing. You walking through this life is just something to behold. And maybe they make mistakes. And maybe they take part in behaviors that we can't appreciate. But that's okay. We don't have to be part of those behaviors. We can still love them. Swamiji and I had a conversation while he was here. I had a situation I had to handle, and I wanted to be sure that I was handling it with compassion. And it was a little bit of an interesting situation, and I explained it to him, and I'm not going to say what the details are to that, but it had to do with the end of a relationship with someone based on a behavior that I perceived to be violent and unchangeable, basically because the person said they wouldn't change their behavior because they saw nothing wrong with it. And I explained to Swamiji what was happening, and I said, now what I'm asking of you is, there's not a right or a wrong, and I understand that, but is it okay to say no more? Is it okay to walk away from this relationship? And he said, oh yeah, absolutely. He said, look, you're a teacher. What are you teaching? He said, if you're teaching something like nonviolence, and a person comes in and continually commits violence, and you've talked to them and they say, oh, I'm not going to change my violence, then why are they coming to you? Tell them that you love them and send them to find the community that they'll be happy with. They won't be happy with you. They won't be happy with you because the ground rules that you set are completely different than the ones they're willing to live by. There's no space. Their gallon bucket is full. And it's so full that they can't see the potential of letting go of a violent behavior. So let them go. But tell them that you love them so that they don't go away feeling unloved. And that was really profound. And it's not that I hadn't heard that or known that before, but it was a reminder, because we all need reminders. It's not enough to say, oh, you know what, I read this book. I guess I'm now an expert in the yoga of divine virtues. No. You got to talk about it. You got to practice it. You've got to make mistakes with regard to it. You've got to talk to teachers and others. You've got to interact with it. And it's through that interaction and that openness that the heart and the mind become purified. Because you're willing to see that the ocean is much more vast than what your ego is willing to perceive. And the possibilities in your own life are much more vast than what the ego is willing to perceive. So if we want to experience the purity of our heart, the purity of our mind, the purity of our body, the purity of our spirituality, we need to be willing to go there, do the work. Face the fact that we've all committed atrocities, but they don't define us unless we let them. Unless we say, well, you know what? I was mean to that person. I guess that's who I am. I guess I'm a mean person. No. You had a moment. There was something that was said. Maybe you need to make reparations for it. Maybe you need to sit with yourself and examine where it came from and why, what triggered you. Maybe you need to understand yourself more. Maybe you need to apologize. Maybe you need to commit to never behaving that way again. Or as Thich Nhat Hanh would say, at least for the next 5 minutes. For the next 5 minutes, I will not do that. And then 5 minutes from now, you say it again. Until you feel strong enough that you can say, just for today. And then it's just for today until you feel strong enough in your resolve that you can say, just for this week. And then you probably won't get beyond that. So you got to go back to just for these 5 minutes. But that's because we're human, And we visit the knowledge, and the knowledge awakens something inside of us, and we surrender a little bit. But then we're still interacting with the world and with each other and with our triggers. And so something will inevitably happen that will take us to another layer, another level of that trauma. And it's another opportunity to say, okay, I can be humble here. I can be humble and recognize that I don't have all the answers. I don't have all the answers. I just have a general direction in which I can walk. But if I want the answers, where do I go? Well, I don't go to violence. I don't go to hoarding. I don't go to greed. I don't go to gossip. I don't go to the things that commit harm. If I want answers, I go to the heart of the matter. I look to a teacher, or to a scripture, or to someone who makes commentary on the scripture that is not based in violence. I always hesitate when I hear people talking about scriptures and they say things like, this justifies me being superior to you. I'm like, yeah, not. That doesn't fly because that breeds violence. It breeds violence. It breeds superiority and inferiority. It breeds suffering. And if it breeds suffering, it's not true. It's ego. But if a person talks about a scripture and they say, you see the underlying message here is love. You see the underlying message here is do your work. You see the underlying message here is take responsibility for your actions and be a better person. And here's the way to do it. That person I'll listen to. I'll read. And I'll say, what do they have to offer? Maybe they know a step that I haven't read about yet. Maybe they have an insight that I haven't experienced yet. But the person who says, follow me and me only because I am the only way to go, that human has issues. Because there is no one way except for nonviolence, which is not a person, it is a behavior or a virtue. But when people sit there and say, I had this person I used to take yoga classes with years ago. She would walk into class and she would be very specific. And she would tell the class, so you're coming to yoga here, and you're practicing your yoga with me. You should therefore not go to anybody else. I never forget. She was one of the only yoga teachers in the town, so, Otherwise, you had to drive a half an hour to go someplace else or an hour away. And so I used to go there, and I would take her classes every once in a while. And one day, I brought Ed to class with me. So we go in, and it wasn't every time, but it was like when she was in a tizzy, like something happened that she would feel she had to say this. So she walks into the class, and again, she's a little full of herself, and she says, so now you are practicing yoga here, and you're practicing yoga with me, and you should not be practicing with any other teacher. And Ed looked at me, and he said, why are you practicing here? And I said, because she's one of the only teachers in town. And technically she's okay, it's an okay class. And he was like, I'm leaving. I'll be in the car. He stayed for the rest of the class, but he never really went back again. And I went back once or twice after that, a couple of times after that. But yeah, Even though I went to the class, I understood what she was saying and how incorrect it was. But I still went. But what he pointed out to me, which was absolutely correct, was that the more I continue to go to that class, perhaps in a moment, the more I forget that what she was saying was incorrect. Yeah. So I said to him, well, then that means I have to drive at least an hour to go to a class that I'm going to feel comfortable in, And he was like, so drive the hour. So I did. Yeah. So funny. But what other things in life are we sticking to that we shouldn't be? What other things are we listening to? How violent is the music that we have on our radio right now?
The movies.
The movies.
The cartoons for the kids.
Oh goodness.
Video games.
The video games. Shoot them up.
I don't even play them, but that's what I hear, that they're atrocious.
They are atrocious. They're beyond atrocious. They're so beyond atrocious. My grandson comes over and he knows, he's 10 years old and he's very intelligent. And he knows that that my perspective on things is peace. And so he comes in and he goes, Mimi, I want to tell you about my favorite video game. And I looked at him and he goes, it's not violent. I said, tell me about it. So he starts telling me about it. And he's like, you got to collect these things and whatnot. And then he goes, and then you get to this one level, and then you get a gun.
Oh.
And I looked at him, and he goes, okay. He's like, it's not that kind of gun, it's a blaster. I said, what does it blast? He said energy or something like that, I don't even know. Yeah, and I was like, what is it blasted at? And he was like, I'm not winning this conversation. I said, even look at Pac-Man. It all started with Pac-Man, didn't it?
Space invaders, Pac-Man.
Yeah, exactly. Shoot 'em up, eat 'em up, beat 'em up.
Asteroids, blow 'em up.
Asteroids, blow 'em up.
It's always about going to the next level.
And it's always about getting to the next level. And where does that get you? With your bucket fuller and your space less. And then you become so addicted to the game that you forget what is the reality.
And now for the self, the self, it's not violent, but it's competition, it's fairs, it's liars. So
I tell you,
there.
I know there was a night in my life, probably prior to, 20 years ago, where I didn't dream, ding, that somebody messaged me at 3 a.m. on Facebook, because there was no Facebook, and there was no cell phone. I know there was a time in my life where that was completely absent, and I actually got to sleep through the night. Every once in a while now, I'll be in the deepest of sleeps and I'll hear, ding. And I'll be like saying to myself in my sleep, your phone's not on, go to bed. But now, what are we? We're like accessible 24/7 because of these things. Because of the technology. You know, my little cell phone right here. Yeah. We're accessible 24/7 because of Facebook. I have friends all over the world, and I have people in India, and they messaged me, and they texted me on my cell phone. And I don't know, India's like, 15 hours behind or something, so I'm sleeping, you know. And then I got a second message a couple hours later. Did you not get my message? I was sleeping. Time difference. It just goes to show that it happens everywhere with everybody. You know, we live in a world that wants instantaneous results. We don't want to get an empty bucket that has space in it. We want to get the bucket full already. But then in doing that and having that immediate response, immediate reaction, the ability to go out and buy, eat, and no satisfaction, where is the space and time to investigate the true self? Where is it? Like, I don't need that. I got my freedom. Really? If you have your freedom, then why are you so miserable? The moment it rains when you wanted sunshine, the moment that you get a little spot on your clothing, the moment that your friend calls to cancel, why, if you are so free, are you so miserable? That's not freedom. That's suffering. And that's the ego telling you that if you get, then you'll eventually experience freedom. But the reality is, if you give, then you will experience freedom. If you give it all away, you will eventually experience freedom. If you allow yourself to be unattached, then you will be unaffected and undisturbed. But if you allow yourself to attach to things, then you'll be burdened. And we can tell ourselves whatever story we want with regard to that. But the reality is that for every story, we're like, you ever see the mule and Sister Mary or something, that old Western show where the mule, right? What was the name of that show? It was like a John Wayne show, right? Yeah, totally. Yeah. The mule is walking along, right? And he's got like these big packs of things on his poor back. Oh, man. And you're like, that's what we are. We're walking around with these packs, with these buckets, just full of stuff that's really not useful to us. So we can dump some of it out, a little bit at a time so that we're not too shocked. You know, we can take the load off the back. And in doing so, maybe we can take the load off the donkey's back too. And the load off of other people's backs that we've put there. Maybe we can take the expectations back, the requirements, and just recognize that we can love everybody. We can love everyone. We can harm none. And if someone is living a life that is contrary to, to how we want to live our life, then we can just love them anyway. But say, there's a community somewhere that will support that. Go be happy. Because you won't be happy here. Because we won't conform to that. And in being honest with yourself about who you are and what you want in this life, then you'll find purity in yourself. And you'll recognize it in others too. Purity is not a puritanical word. It doesn't have to be scary. What the purity actually does for us is it lightens the burden so that when the sun rises, we're clear enough to appreciate it. And when the sun sets, we're clear enough to appreciate it. And no matter what comes our way, we have enough freedom and space to be grateful for it, no matter what it is. And when things leave, we have enough space and enough faith to be grateful for the time that they were here, to be grateful for the interaction and for whatever we learned. And in that way, we can just continue growing and being and serving and being and learning and being. Any thoughts, questions, ideas? It's pretty straightforward, right?
I'm noticing for myself, especially after coming off of the week that I came off of, and I did it with my sisters, and the patterns that exist between us that we developed in a very unhealthy household of competition.
Mm.
And I was an athlete, so competition had this role to play. And I recognized that I was always a fair athlete. You know, I never did anything illegal or harmful, but just the energy of competition and moving in that direction. There are places where it just plain doesn't work. So if you could give me your thoughts and ideas about whether or not competition even has a place.
Yeah.
Because it was so much a part of me, and I know that I'm deconstructing it.
Mm.
Because it is, peacefulness is definitely the intention for my life. But
Yeah.
noticing that.
Such a great question.
Yeah.
Thank you for asking it.
Mm-hmm.
There's two ways to there's at least 1,000 ways, but right now there are two ways that are coming to me.
Mm-hmm.
And the first is to say that there are 4 ashrams in life that we live. According to yoga, there are four distinct ashrams of life. 0 to 25, you are a student. And the role of the student is to learn. And learning can be conducted in a couple of different ways. One is through the pure experience of having an experience. And the other is through comparative analysis, how I am learning in comparison to you. When we go that route, we breed competition. Because why do you understand that so much better than I do, or so much worse than I do, or so much differently than I do? What is that? And it sets up difference. It sets up this idea of separation. So you understand the apple because you enjoy the sweetness on the inside. I understand the apple because it's red and round. Who's right? Neither of us. Both of us. Right, exactly. We each have a certain picture that is experiential. And if we can look at our time in this life in that light, we'll have a much more fulfilling experience of learning. The second phase we come into is the phase of the householder. And this phase of life, which is typically 25 to 50, is really tricky because it typically builds on the learning phase, which more often than not focuses on the comparative analysis and not the experiential. So it focuses on the competition. And now, we're in a place where, I want a good job, I want a spouse, I want 2.5 children and a white picket fence, I want a career, I want all these things, I'm ambitious. And ambition and competition are lovers. You cannot have one without the other. So if you're going to be ambitious, you must be competitive. And if you're going to be competitive, the only reason that you are is because you're ambitious. Householder, there's a tribe in South Africa, I think it is in Africa. There's a tribe that they were only recently, like within the last 30 or 40 years, well, maybe 50 now, introduced to Western ways of doing things. Some anthropologist or whatever had stumbled upon them when they were going through some deep forested area. And they came across these people, and what they found through observation before they introduced themselves to them, they watched. And what they found was that their villages were circular. And the doorways were open. And the doors were open to a central area. And you could see right in the door of your neighbor. And there was no taking other than what you needed. And then they introduced themselves. And when they went in, they found that there were some pretty interesting practices that were happening among these tribal people. And one was that they were hunter-gatherers. So the men, and some women too, would go off on a big game hunt. And they would come back with whatever they acquired. And the person who came back with the largest animal was not put up onto a pedestal. As a matter of fact, they were criticized. That the people would come around and they would look and assess to begin to prepare whatever it was that was caught. And they would look at the one and they would say, I wouldn't feed this to my sick grandmother. They would say things like that. And the anthropologist was like perplexed by this. I guess their version of Thanksgiving came around. So the anthropologist thinks, well, I'm going to go to town and I'm going to bring back something, for the village. So I guess he goes and gets maybe a cow or something, I don't know, an oxen or whatever it is. And he brings it back to be prepared for the meal. And when he brings it in, he's expecting Western mind thought. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That's so kind of you. What a beautiful gift. Oh my gosh, this will feed so many. But what does he hear instead? This is horrible. This is the worst thing I've ever seen. This couldn't feed 2 people, never mind a village of people. This is unacceptable. This animal was probably diseased. And they're saying all these things, and the anthropologist is getting like, do you know what I paid for this? Do you know how much I put out? Do you know how much money I paid for this? Later, he goes along and he comes across the person that he befriended, which was like the assistant to the chief or whatever, he was like the second in charge. And he goes, can I ask you, what did I do wrong? And he said, nothing. He said, that was a very kind gift, thank you. And he said, that's not what everybody said. He said, you don't understand our ways. If you gave that presentation and all we did was say, oh my gosh, thank you so much. You're such a good person. You're so kind. This is amazing. This will feed the group for weeks. You would have gotten so full of yourself. So instead we keep you humble. He said the hunter that came back with the amazing bounty, he said, we don't build him up to be better. What will the other hunters think? They'll think they're not good enough. And eventually they'll lose interest in supporting the community. So we keep everybody humble. Mm-hmm. The woman who makes the most beautiful quilts, don't tell her she makes the most beautiful quilts. You want everybody to make the quilt. And everybody is collaborating to make the quilt, not just one person. Mm-hmm. And the anthropologist who was there, whose name escapes me now, but he's really a famous anthropologist, he got this, and he wrote a book about it. And he was so criticized for his perspectives. Because the West said, nope, competition, ambition, hierarchy. Got to put somebody above somebody else. So his insights that he gained were rejected for some good part by the community. And then they said, oh, it must be a farce. You must have misunderstood. And it's like, no, actually I didn't. You know. So in this ambition phase of life, it very much is built on this comparison that we go through as children about what's better than what else. And then it goes into, what am I going to get now? What am I going to create? But then we come to the third ashram of life, and that's like 50 to 75. And we start around the age of 50. For some people younger, for some people older. For some people it doesn't happen. It depends on the karmic load. But we do start questioning. Great, I've got a 15,000 square foot house. My kids have left. I've got tchotchkes on every windowsill. I've got a career that I work 80 hours a week. I'm freaking tired. What does this all mean? There's no space in my bucket. And I'm not happy. Shouldn't I be happy? Shouldn't I be freaking overjoyed? I got all my goals. Why do I feel so empty? So they start simplifying. You know, they start letting go of things. Maybe a little thing here, a little thing there. For some people, they let go of a lot. Some people let go of everything. Mm-hmm. Then they reach 75-ish. 75 till whenever one dies is considered the phase or the ashram of the renunciate, of the deepening, really deepening the spiritual learnings, moving away from the material world and into the world of no competition, because it's a conversation between you and that. So does competition have a place? It has a natural occurrence, depending on the temperament of the person. It will have a natural place in their life, depending on the temperament of the person. So you'll have a person who is more prone to being competitive. And it could be that that's natural for them based on karmic influence. It could be cultural. It could be their upbringing from their parents. You got to be a doctor, you got to be a doctor, you got to be a doctor. Can't be a musician. But at some point in time, with the way that the cosmic consciousness works, it's like the washing machine has a wash, a rinse, and a spin. And the cosmic consciousness has its own natural way of taking that competition and putting it into its proper perspective. And we see that through the ashrams of life. So I wouldn't worry so much if anything was lost or wasted or missed. No, nothing was. It was just an experience. And now you get to have a new one. Mm-hmm. How fortunate are you? How fortunate are we all? I hope I hope that was helpful.
It was.
Yeah.
It was. And as much as helpfulness as it was to me, I have a 9-year-old granddaughter who's, my dad really wants her to play tennis, and I coached for a very long time too. And I'm wanting to be able to offer something that is useful, because we're close. So while I'm figuring it out, it's like, all right, well, what do I say about competition now, since I'm seeing the places where it interfered?
Ask her what she wants. And when she says, I want to play tennis, say, I'm asking what you want. There was I don't think it was that movie. I was just watching something recently, and two people were having a conversation, and I believe that they were becoming lovers. They were entering into an intimate relationship. And the one person said to the other person, what are your goals? What do you want in this life? And the woman answered, I don't really know, because no one's ever really asked me what I want. They've only ever told me what I should have. Mm-hmm. Ask her what she wants. And then hold a space for her to have an emptier bucket so she can figure that out. Yeah,
Thanks.
absolutely. If I can remember what that movie was, I'll send you the name of it, because it was really profound on a lot of levels. A lot of levels. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions?
In this country, at the age of 75 or whenever, where would the typical person become the renunciate? Where would they live? What does that look like?
Well, for a householder, it looks much different than it does for like someone like Swamiji, you know. For a householder, it would just be that they spend more time, you know, in self-inquiry, studying what they find to be the scripture that they've adopted. Maybe they spend more time in service of humanity. But they spend less time, you know, cheering on the Giants or, you know, or trying to win things. And they spend more time giving. They spend more time serving. And maybe they downsize. You know, maybe they downsize their house. Now, in Ed's and my situation, which was a special situation, given, you know, everything that he's been going through and with the cancer and everything, and but we made a decision. We let go of the house. And we moved into an apartment, and we got rid of 80% of what we owned, and much of it, you know, were things that he held near and dear, and that I held near and dear, but that we understood didn't have a place anymore. Like, you know, we really don't need 3 of those or 2 of those, or and we don't need a 4-bedroom house when it's just me and him living there. So we went and we got a 1-bedroom apartment, and we were really happy there. You know, he was rehabilitating from his surgeries, and it was just such a sweet year. But we also, during that year, took a lot of time to go really deep in our studies and in our practices. And when I tell you that, you know, I was potentially chanting thousands of japa every day, it's the truth. I sat for hours every day and did nothing but chant. Sat for hours every day in meditation, and just took that time to have an empty bucket, you know, and to hold space for him for what he needed, and for myself too, and what I needed. And then finally, you know, one day the universe just kind of sent us a series of messages, and it led us here. And we can look at this and say, this is not simple. And I agree, it's not. But it's also not mine. I may be facilitating it. I may be guiding it. I may be supporting it. But I don't have ownership. I don't accept ownership over it. This doesn't belong to me. You know, I mean, legally, I'm not talking about legally. Legally, you know, it is what it is. But in my heart, this is the community. This is for you as much as it's for me. And yeah. So there are ways to serve that you can let go of your complexity. And let go of your expectations. A student asked me one time about our school in New Jersey, long before we knew we were coming here. They said, you know, I don't get this like non-grasping thing, because I kind of feel like, you know, if you lost the school, you would be affected. And I said, maybe. I said, but I would be okay with it. Like, it's okay. It's here now, and I'm grateful for that, and this is what I'm doing, and this is the path I'm walking, and yay. But if for some reason tomorrow it was decided it shouldn't be here, or its purpose is no longer, it's fulfilled its purpose, then that just means that there's someplace else I need to be. So I best go and do that, so that I can be more present in my own life and not living in the past. They had a hard time with that.
And there's also a difference with grasping at something and something just naturally being removed, so to speak.
Absolutely, exactly. And, we won't talk about it today, but we can in a future one, is that this is death also. We die deaths every moment.
Mm-hmm.
Every moment. Yeah. And we're like, no, I don't want to. And that leads up to the ultimate dying. And we grasp on. We say, I don't want that. I don't want that change. But not I don't think it's Carl Sagan. Is he the one? He's the one who started that show on TV, but who's the gentleman who runs it now?
Neil deGrasse?
Who? What?
Neil deGrasse?
Yes, thank you. Oh, finally somebody who knows his name.
You've been asking about that.
Oh, you've given me such relief. Thank you. Neil deGrasse. I saw a conversation he was having with somebody. And they were taking separate sides on death. And the one gentleman was saying how, I'm going to go out fighting. Like, I'm attached to this life. I love it here. I got my family. I've got my house, my cars, my career. I don't want to go anywhere. And Neil was saying, he said, I look at it totally differently. I see that I was not afraid when I came into this world of where I had been. Therefore, I don't need to be afraid of where I'm going. The time when I became afraid was when I got here. But I wasn't afraid of what came before. And I'm going back there, so why should I be afraid? Fear only took me over here, in this life. And it still gives me goosebumps thinking about that.
Mm.
And on a separate note, if you do watch that show, what is the name of that show? Something about the universe or... Yeah.
Good.
It is. It's great. My niece, Anna Jane, plays Time in one of the clips behind him. She's a young girl. She's in her early teens. She's got long blonde hair, and she's wearing, I think, either a flowing blue gown or a flowing red gown. And so she's in the background, and she plays Time. Yeah. So she's an actress and a model. But really interesting, yeah. So why should we be afraid to go? Why should we be afraid to let go? Why should we be afraid to put away old habits and replace them with newer, more uplifting habits? Yeah, it's part of the journey. Any other thoughts or questions for today? We're good? Okay. Let's sit up nice and tall. And close the eyes. Take a breath in and a breath out. And as you breathe, feel the purity of yourself, of your true self. Go beyond your stories, your ideas, your opinions. Go into the essence of who you really are. And placing the right hand on the heart, left hand over the right. And together we'll lift our voices in one beautiful Om. Take a nice breath in. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. May all beings everywhere find peace, love, light, and happiness. May all beings know their oneness. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Namaste. Thank you all so much for being here today. So good to see and gather with each and every one of you. Enjoy the rest of your day. We are on a special schedule today because of we have some of the staff doing some training. So there's no kirtan today. But they are serving. If you haven't eaten, enjoy. Okay. Oh, yes.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you too.